안녕하세요. 꾸준한 영어 테드쌤입니다. 자, 오늘도 사랑받는 영미 시선 100선 중에서 Fire and Ice라는 시를 선택을 하였습니다. 로버트 프로스트 시인이 쓰신 인간의 욕망과 열정에 대한 시로서 욕망과 열정이 너무 지나치게 과하게 되면 분노, 욕망, 열정들이 세상을 멸망으로 이끌 수도 있다는 종말에 대한 시이기도 한데요. 또한 fire이 분노와 욕망에 대한 얘기를 하였다면 ice는 지나친 냉정함과 증오를 얘기한다고 합니다. 그래서 이 두 가지 감정에 대한 것들이 자신의 감정에 비유를 함으로써 무조건적인 멸망을 얘기한다기보다는 감정에 대한 충분한 조정들이 있어야 한다라는 메시지를 전달을 하기 위해서 썼다고 하네요. 자, 항상 말씀드리지만 저도 시를 읽어보면서 어떤 그 감동을 아니면 그 메시지의 이해를 위해서 이해를 해보려고 하는 이제 갓 시를 읽어보는 사람이거든요. 여러분들도 짧은 시이지만 한번 들어보시면서 정말 그런 것인지 어떤 내용의 그러니까 메시지가 제대로 전달되는지 한번 느껴보시기 바랍니다. 자, 꼭지야. 우리 시 한번 읽어보자. 그래. Fire and Ice by Robert Frost. Some say the world will end in fire. Some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those two favor fire. But if it had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction ice is also great, and the word suffice. 굉장히 짧고 강렬한 시라는 생각이 듭니다. 많은 생각을 하게 되네요. 자, 불에 의한 멸망도 괜찮지만 얼음에 의한 멸망에 대해서도 얘기를 한다. 근데 단순한 멸망에 대한 얘기가 아니라 경우의 수를 두어서 양쪽을 다 상상해보는 네. 세상의 종말에 대한 이야기라기보다는 제가 느낄 때는 개인에 대한 감정의 폭을 조절해야 된다라는 메시지를 주시는 것 같아요. 저도 잘 모르기 때문에 제가 느끼는 말을 얘기하는 겁니다. 자, 우리 꼭지가 오늘은 아주 저한테서 떨어지질 않는군요. 자, 우리 꼭지랑 같이 한번 읽어보도록 하겠습니다. 오늘은 어제 낭독했던 거에 이어서 Chapter 7 계속 이어서 읽어보겠습니다. Chapter 7 A new friend in need. In the days that followed, Chester's behavior was exemplary. He purred and he cooed and he cleaned his paws, and he rubbed up against everyone's legs to show what a good boy he was. I was getting worried. Chester acts that way only when he was something devious in the back of his mind. But I didn't know what it was. He had tried everything in the book to get rid of vampires, and all his efforts had failed. But I knew from the expression on his face that something was definitely up. Of course, I didn't know for certain, because he had not spoken to me since the stake instant. I guess he realized that my heart just wasn't in the destruction of the bunny vampire. In fact, I was beginning to like the little fellow. The mourners were relieved by Chester's improved behavior. They didn't know how to account for his strange doings, but, to their credit, they were willing to let bygones be bygones. The only disturbing factor in all our lives was the reappearance of the white vegetables each morning in the kitchen. And yet, after a few days, even that had stopped and life seemed to return to normal. One evening, I dropped by Bonicola's cage to chat. I had found myself doing that more and more since Chester had stopped talking to me. Of course, Bonicola didn't talk back, but he was a good listener. I had begun to think of him as a friend, a strange one, granted, but one can't always choose one's friends. I was distressed this particular evening to see that he was dragging his ears, as it were. He looked tired and listless. I felt his nose, and it seemed a little warmer than it should have been. I became alarmed. I ran over to Toby, who was doing a picture puzzle on the floor, and began to bark. Something I do only in cases of extreme emergency, since even I do not care for the sound. "What's the matter, Harold?" Toby asked without moving. "Are there burglars?" I ran to the cage and looked at Bonicola. I looked back at Toby and whimpered. Toby just looked confused. "Do you want to play with Bonicola? Shall I take him out of the cage?" "Woof!" I responded, indicating I hoped that that was indeed what he should do. "I'll ask Mom and Dad, Harold. You wait here." He was back in a minute, shaking his head. "I'm sorry, Harold, but Mom says you can't play with the rabbit. It causes too much commotion." I looked down at the floor and whimpered again. "Sorry, Harold. Maybe later, when we are all in here together." I regarded Bonicola, whose eyes met mine. He gave a little shudder, and I felt like crying. My friend was sick, and I didn't know what to do. I wished I could tell Chester, but I knew it was no use. He was just too mad at me. I would have to sort this one, but on my own. I would have to sort this one out on my own. That night, I couldn't sleep worrying about Benicola. I decided to go downstairs and check on his condition. What I saw when I entered the living room horrified me. Benicola was out of his cage on the floor, while Chester stood in front of him, a piece of garlic around his neck and his arms outstretched, blocking the kitchen door. Suddenly, it all fell into place. Chester was starving Benicola. Of course, that's why he seemed so listless, and that's why the vegetables had stopped turning white. Chester had made it impossible for Benicola to eat. "Chester!" I cried. Chester jumped a very high jump. "What are you doing down here?" He spat at me as he landed. "I know what you're doing, Chester, and the jig is up. That little bunny never hurt anybody. All he's doing is eating his own way. What do you care if he drains a few vegetables?" "He's a vampire," Chester snarled. "Today, vegetables. Tomorrow, the world." "I think perhaps you're overstating your case," I suggested cautiously. "Go back to bed, Harold. This is larger than the two of us. It may seem harsh, but I'm only being cruel to be kind." Who's he being kind to? I wondered, as I went back upstairs. The tomatoes and the zucchinis of the world? maybe a few captures. It just didn't make sense. But I could see I wasn't going to get anywhere with Chester tonight. Tomorrow, however, would be another story, and I was determined that, by hook or by crook, my friend's Bunicular would eat by sundown the next day. Chapter 8. Disaster in the Dining Room. I realized that there was nothing I could do for Bunicular during the day since he was sleeping, but that gave me time to plan my strategy. At first, I thought I would bring food to his cage, but then it occurred to me that Chatter must be taking everything away that was given to him. Pete and Toby usually left the letters for Nicola during the day, while he was sleeping, and Chester, ever watchful, probably napped it each evening just before the rabbit walk. No, there would have to be another way. I thought and thought all afternoon, and I could see that Chester had done a good job of isolating Bunicular from his food. There was no way I could think of to overcome Chester's game plan. As evening drew closer and I grew more and more frantic, I stumbled into the dining room and saw the answer to my problems sitting before me on the table. It was a big bowl of a salad. All I had to do was get Bunicular to the salad and let him get this filled before the family came into it. With that funny white dressing on it, they would never notice if a few vegetables were white. I ran to the hallway to check the clock. 6:15. It would be 15 minutes before the sun went down and Bunicular woke up. I would then need at least 5 minutes to get him from his cage to the table and feed him. All I had to do was make sure no one came into the room until he had finished. I needed a good 20 minutes at least. I went back into the living room. Chester was asleep on his brown velvet chair, chatting in his sleep, still worn out from the previous night's activities. I checked upstairs. Toby was reading his Toby was reading in his room the last chapter of Treasure Island. I noted. Pete, who should have been doing his homework, was listening to records in his room. I ran down to the kitchen. "Hello, Harold," Mrs. Murnau said as I came through the door. "What's new?" "Other than Rabbit starving in the next room and an imminent attack on your salad bowl, nothing," I thought. I stood at her feet and panted. She scratched my head. This gave me a moment to check out how far she was in her cooking. "Sorry, Harold," she said. "I have to baste this chicken." I noticed the oven timer still had 35 minutes to go. It will be tight, I thought, but I can make it. Now, where is Mr. Monroe? I went to the front door and whimpered loudly. Mrs. Monroe followed me. "Are you waiting for Daddy, Harold? He will be home soon." "Soon isn't good enough. How soon?" I whimpered again. "Patience, boy. He's late at school meeting. He shall be here any time." She went back into the kitchen, and I checked the clock. 6:25. It was getting dark, and Chester was still asleep. Time to swing into action. Having watched Chester undo the lock on Bunicula's cage, and having participated in that unfortunate steak episode some days earlier, I knew I would have no problem getting Bunicula out. I just had to be a little more careful where I positioned my head so that I wouldn't find myself in the humiliating predicament of getting stuck a second time. My timing was perfect, with Bunicula swinging peacefully from my teeth. I made my way stealthily toward the dining room as the last rays of sunlight gave way to the dark of night. Once inside the dining room door, But Nicola awakened in great bewilderment. It is not every day, after all, that one finds oneself, upon awakening, hanging from the jaws of a fellow creature, and so caring and gentle a creature as myself. But Nicola opened his eyes wide and turned his face as best he could to me. I jumped up onto the nearest chair and placed the rabbit safely on the table's edge. Okay, I whispered. There's your dinner. Go to it. Get your fill as fast as you can. Poor Bunny. I'll stand the guard. I don't know that Bunnicula fully understood what was going on, but the sight of the vegetables piled high in the center of the table sent him scurrying in their direction. He was very hungry. As luck would have it, and as I should have anticipated, Chester's sense of timing was as astute as my own. No sooner had Bunnicula reached the edge of the salad bowl than the door swung open and Chester bounded into the room. He surveyed the scene frantically. I was unable to act fast enough. Upon seeing Bunnicula about to enjoy his first bit of nourishment in days, Chester leaped across the table, seemingly without touching floor, chairs, or anything else between himself and our furry friend, and landed directly on top of the bunny. "Oh, no, you don't!" he shrieked. Bunnicula, not sure what to do, jumped high in the air and landed, with a great scattering of greens, smack in the center of the salad bowl. Lettuce and tomatoes and carrots and cucumbers went flying all over the table and onto the floor. Chester flattened his ears, wiggled his rear end, and smiled in anticipation. To cat observers, this is known as the attack position. "Run, Bunnicula!" I shouted. Bunnicula turned in my direction, as if to ask where. "Anywhere!" I cried. "Just to get out of his way." Chester sprang, Bunnicula jumped, and in the flash of a second they had changed positions. Chester now found himself flat on his back, owing to the slipperiness of the salad dressing in the bowl, and Bunnicula, too dazed to even think about food now, hovered quivering on the table. Chester was having a great deal of difficulty getting back on his feet, but I knew it was only a matter of seconds before he'd attack again, and I knew also that Bunnicula was too petrified to do anything to save himself. So I did the only thing I could. I barked very loudly and very rapidly. The whole family rushed through the doors. Mr. Munro must have just come home, because his coat was still on. "Oh, no," cried Mrs. Munro. "That's it, Chester. This is Chester's last stand." Chester rolled his eyes heavenward and didn't even try to move. "Mom," said Toby, tugging at his mother's arm, "look at Bunnicula. How did he get out of his cage? He looks scared." "Of course he's scared," Mrs. Munro said. "We probably forgot to latch his cage, and he got out. And I think Chester has been chasing him." Toby put his face close to the rabbit. Mom, doesn't Bunnicula look kinda sick? We'd better take them all to the vet to see if the damage was done." She answered. I started to whimper. No need for me to go to the vet. Mr. Monroe patted my head. "You may as well take Harold along," he said. "He's probably due for his shot." Mrs. Monroe carefully picked Chester out of the salad bowl and carried him by the scruff of the neck to the kitchen. I'm gonna give Chester a quick bath," she said to Mr. Monroe. "Why don't you put together a fresh salad, Toby? You and Peter put Bunnicula back in his cage and then clean up the table." I didn't stick around for an assignment. this was not the time to be in the way. And besides, I now had a whole evening and a night to ruin the worrying about the next morning's visit to the vet. This little effort of mine, I thought, has been a disaster in more ways than one. Chapter 9. All's well that ends well, almost. Looking back on that night, I remember I remember thinking that this whole mess could never be resolved happily. What would have become of Panicolo, my new friend, who was suffering from starvation? Starvation? And the word of Chester, my old friend, who seemed to have flipped his lid, and if you pardon the expression, was in the doghouse with the Monroes. Of far greater concern at that time, of course, was my own future. For on that night all that consumed my thoughts was the fear of the next day's injections. It all seemed hopeless indeed. But looking back on the next day, I can tell you that happy endings are possible, even in situations as fraught with complications as this one was. Early the next morning, we all piled into the car, some of us with greater reluctance than others, and thundered off to the vet. And by afternoon we were on our way to solving our problems. The vet worked everything out very nicely. He discovered that Banicula was suffering from extreme hunger. I could have told him that. Rather than jar his fragile stomach with solid foods, the doctor decided that he should be put on a rickety diet until he got better. So Bonicula was immediately given some carrot juice, which he drank eagerly. After he finished, he looked over at me with a great grin on his face and winked. Chester was diagnosed as being emotionally overwrought. It was suggested that he start sessions with a cat psychiatrist to work out what the doctor called a case of a sibling rivalry with Banicula. I asked Chester later what a sibling was, but he wasn't speaking to me. So I looked it up. It's like a brother or sister, and the sibling rivalry means you are competing with your brother or sister for attention. I wasn't sure this was Chester's problem, but it sure explained a lot about Toby and Pete. As for me, well, I came out the best. Dr. Wasserman was all set to give me my shots when the nurse came in with my card. Wait, doctor, this dog doesn't need his shots yet. It's too soon. So I got a pat on the head and the doggy pop instead. These days, everything is back to normal in the Monroe household. Almost. Bunnicula liked his liquid diet so much that the Monroes have kept him on it, and oddly enough, there had been no problems with the vegetables mysteriously turning white since. Chester, of course, insists that his proves his theory. This proves his theory. Obviously, Harold, the liquefied vegetables take the place of the vegetable juices, so Bunnicula has no need to go roaming anymore. Then he's not a vampire, I said. Nonsense! He's a vampire, all right, but he's a modern vampire. He gets his juices from a blender. Case closed, Sherlock? I queried. Case closed. Oh, Chester? Yes, Harold. What are those two funny marks on your back on your neck? Chester jumped and I laughed. Very funny, he said as he began to bathe his tail. Very funny. The mourners never knew anything of Chester's theory. They changed the markets, and to this day believe they were the victims of a curious vegetable blight. But Nicola and I have become good friends. He still doesn't say anything, but he snuggles up next to me by the fireplace, and we take long, cozy snoozes together. One night, I sang him a lullaby in the obscure dialect of his homeland, and he slept very peacefully. It was that night that cemented our friendship. Now, about Chester, I said that everything was back to normal. Almost. Naturally. Chester is the almost. He has been seeing his psychiatrist, Dr. Barrick Katz, twice a week for some time now. He takes his therapy very seriously. The other morning, I was trying to get a little sleep when Chester came over and nudged me in the ribs. Harold, do you realize that we've never really communicated? I mean, really communicated? I opened one eye cautiously. And in order to communicate, Harold, you have to really be in touch with yourself. Are you in touch with yourself, Harold? Can you look yourself in the mirror and say, I know who I am. I am in touch with the meanings, that is me, and I can reach out to the universe, that means you, that is you. I closed my eye. I'm used to it by now. He talks like that all the time. He no longer reads Edgar Allan Poe at night. And once he concluded that he had been right about Bunnicula, there was been no more talk about vampires. The mark of the vampire sits, its usefulness obsolete, on its shelf. Right now, he's reading Finding Yourself by Screaming a Lot. And the other night, when I heard the most awful noise coming from the basement, I didn't even bat an eyelid. I knew it was just Chester finding himself, as he calls it. He explains to me that he is getting in touch with his kittenhood, and I've told him that's fine, just to let me know when he's going to do it, so I can be elsewhere. I've had enough trouble from Chester's adventures. So that's my story, and the story of a mysterious stranger who no longer seems quite so mysterious and who is definitely no longer a stranger. I've presented the I've presented the facts as clearly as I could, and I leave it to you, dear reader, to draw your own conclusions. I must now bring the narrative to a close since it is Friday night, Toby's night to stay up late and read, and I can hear the crickling of a cellophane. I can only hope it covers the two chocolate cupcakes with a cream filling. 네, Chester 너무 귀엽지 않나요? 우리 꼭지랑 한번 다 읽어보았습니다. 꼭지, 꼭지야, 꼭지, 꼭지. 네, 우리 꼭지랑 잠시 노는 거 보여드렸고요. 오늘 낭독은 여기까지 하도록 하겠습니다.